Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
Hello, everybody. This is Sandy, and I am the founder and chief love officer at lastfirstdate.com. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Last First Date Radio is an acclaimed show about achieving healthy, off-the-charts love in the second half of life. So whether you're single or married or in a long-term relationship, this show has something for everybody, and in particular, today's show is very relevant to anyone at any stage of life. I am thrilled to be speaking with Dr. Arthur C. Amaikoli about using empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy as a way to reduce anxiety and develop resilience. And boy, we have a lot of stress in our lives today, and I'm really, really excited to have him on the show. I love his book, The Stress Solution. So he'll be coming up in just a few minutes. And as a dating coach, I specialize in helping women date as the high-value women that they are in every other part of their lives, because I believe that when a woman knows her true worth, she attracts her most aligned partner. And most women who come to me for support are amazing in every other part of their lives, but they have challenges in the romance section of their lives, and my goal is to have them date with the same value that they bring to the other parts of their lives. And often we make mistakes that we're not even aware of. So what I've done is compiled a list of what the top 3 mistakes are, and I've created a free guide for you so that you can uncover the mistakes that you may be unknowingly making, and you'll be able to turn them around with actionable steps. So you can grab that free report by going to lastfirstdate.com, and you can sign up right on my homepage. I also want to invite you to my Facebook group, Your Last First Date. So just go to facebook.com/Your Last First Date, and you can apply to get into the group. There's no cost to apply. I just have to approve you, and it's a place to come for support that is positive, healthy, and forward-moving instead of whining and being stuck, which happens without the right kind of support, because I want you to go on your last first date. Proud to be sponsored by Audible. If you would like a copy of an Audible book, an Audible book on tape, and a free month of Audible, just go to audibletrial.com/lastfirstdate, and you can choose from over 200,000 titles. And now for my special guest, Arthur Sierra Amaikoli he's a PhD in EDD. He is the author of The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resilience. He's a licensed clinical psychologist, and he's the chief medical officer of soundminds.org, a popular mental health platform. He's been on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and chief psychologist of Metro West Medical Center. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandy. How are you?
I am great. Really excited to have you on today.
Well, thanks
Talking
very
about
much.
stress and stress management, and especially empathy. And what's interesting is that at the end of my marriage, one of the biggest issues for me in my marriage was that my husband was really not good at expressing emotion and dealing with any kind of conflict. It's a pretty common issue, right?
Yes.
And at the end of our marriage, he started to learn how to be empathic. He started studying with Marshall Rosenberg and learned nonviolent communication. And it really was the gift of our divorce that he started to transform a little bit, and we were able to end our relationship in a much more peaceful way than we would have had he not had this education. So I'm a huge believer in the importance of empathy and communication, and what I really want to know is, what is empathic CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and how does it contribute to our better mental and physical health?
Well, cognitive behavioral therapy, Sandy, basically focuses on the way we distort how we perceive. And how we perceive is critical to maintaining intimacy and forming, lasting, very positive relationships. Because if we perceive in distorted ways, we drive our partners crazy, and we also may have distortions about ourselves. So cognitive behavioral therapy basically focuses on present perceiving, and it focuses on the kind of distortions that we can use that really disturb healthy relating, like generalizing or black and white thinking or catastrophizing, mind reading, magnifying, all ways that we don't really see the truth of our partner or our friend and look beyond the surface and see into the heart and soul of another human being. And that's where empathy comes in, because empathy really is the one capacity that allows us to slow down and perceive the truth in other people and in interactions. And it really helps us understand where our biases are. So when you combine empathy with cognitive behavioral therapy, I think you have the best of both worlds, because it allows us to learn how to perceive and see the truth in others and in ourselves more and more so. And when we become comfortable with perceiving the truth, and that's what empathy allows us to do, it also helps us to know who to get close to and who to remain distant from, because empathy basically is everyday mind reading. It's a capacity that we're born with, and we have to develop it as we age so that we can utilize it to its full extent.
Yeah, we often perceive incorrectly, and I teach communication to my clients, especially for women, to understand men better, because we tend to look at everything through a very narrow lens, through rose-colored glasses, through projection. I just got off the phone with somebody today who dated somebody in a very intense way in a very short period of time, and he disappeared. She thought the relationship was going really well, and now that she's got some distance, she's saying, I was really hungry for this to happen. I really wanted this so badly that maybe I was projecting, which often happens, right?
Mm-hmm. And, when we're longing, and I always try to teach my clients, understand and know your longings, because when you're longing for love, or you just have gone through a rejection or a divorce or a very disappointing experience with someone, we don't really see very clearly. Our empathic range becomes very narrow. And when our empathic range comes very narrow, we only see what we want to see. We fill in a lot of the spaces. And when we get involved, romantically and sexually early on with someone, I always say that sex can be binding and blinding. It can, when you have that physical connection with someone, it can make you feel like you know them when you hardly know them at all. It takes time to know another person, and empathy slows down our interactions so that we can see clearly. When we have strong longings for love, however, it's hard to do that. But if we're aware of them, at least we can put them aside for a moment and try to focus a bit on what's happening so we can learn about that other person. Who is this person? And just accepting that nobody knows anybody that quickly. If it's happening quickly and you think you know the whole story, most likely you're mistaken. You may be right in the long run, but you could be wrong.
Yeah, it's important to slow down, to balance the heart and the head, to really not let your body get bonded because you become pretty stupid. You just can't think clearly. Like, what did you say? Blinding and bonding?
It's binding and blinding.
Yeah,
the early
that's
sexual
a good
release of binding and blinding, because it gets recorded in the deep emotional part of the brain, and it makes us think we know the person, especially the physical contact. And when you're longing for love, you can obviously mistake, men and women mistake physical contact for love. It's not love necessarily. It could be love, but it isn't necessarily.
So if somebody comes on really strong, this has happened to me quite a bit, where a person comes on super strong right away, I don't trust it. I feel like they're not really seeing me. This actually happened in my marriage. When I met my husband, he was like, "You're it. and I was
Yeah.
just not trusting it, but I also had kind of given up on love, and so I went along with the program.
Yes.
Now that I know better, I do better. But what do you do if somebody does come on really strong and you try to slow them down and they get annoyed with you? I mean, any tools that you can share to help somebody slow down a bit?
Well, I think you try to give initially the person the benefit of the doubt, because when we don't know each other, people are generally anxious. That's quite natural. So someone may be coming on strong initially, but it's when you make an empathic, tactful comment that you can then understand a person's character. For instance, if I say to you, I'm very complimented by the way you're interacting with me and how complimentary you are, but it's making me a little uncomfortable because you don't really know me very well. Now, if you get angry when I say that, that's a bad sign. If you say, "Gee, I'm sorry, I just went through a divorce and it was horrible, and maybe I'm kind of new at this and I haven't dated in 20 years, and I'm sorry, I'm uncomfortable and maybe I've said a little bit too much," then that's a very good sign, because now the person is saying, "I will take your cue. I will respect that I was a little bit intrusive and made you feel uncomfortable, and I'm going to step back, and now we can gain our bearings and get to know each other." But if the person doesn't accept that, now you should be using your empathy to start to distance yourself, to start to de-invest, because that's a person that is not listening, and that's a person who's not necessarily going to respect you. And I think you have to differentiate between, is this early on anxiety because the person's just uncomfortable, or is this the person's character? This is how they are all the time.
Right, and separate the two. And
yes,
assess.
You have to separate the two. And empathy allows you to assess accurately, because when we're using empathy, and when you're giving and receiving empathy, we produce oxytocin, that love hormone, the hormone that you produce when you're pregnant, a woman is pregnant. But you can produce it in an empathic interchange. And when that happens, when you're deeply listening to another person and they are to you, you automatically feel comfortable. And it reduces anxiety, and it actually reduces cortisol levels, the stress hormone. And oxytocin really gives you a sense of calm and well-being, so you naturally want to be closer to that person. It also reduces cravings for addictive substances. It makes people live longer. It has many, many benefits. But this is really an amazing chemical change that takes place just by how we talk to each other and how we listen to each other. And if you trust yourself enough to slow down, you'll feel it inside your body. You'll know it, because you'll know that this person is not just looking at you as an image or for some status or ego concern. They're really, really trying to get to know you, and you're trying to get to know the other person as well.
That's really true. I didn't realize that you release the same oxytocin hormones in empathy as you do. Yeah, bonding.
Yeah.
In sex and bonding with a newborn. That's pretty awesome. So let's define empathy now that we've been talking about it. How do you define empathy?
Well, empathy is the capacity to understand and respond to the unique experiences of another. It's essentially everyday mind reading. It's a part of our genetic endowment. It's not an emotion or a feeling, but it's a capacity that we develop as we age, if we're exposed to people who have helped us know how to do that. It's sort of like a muscle that if it's not used, it will atrophy. And it's very interesting that you see in young children, like our youngest daughter is a kindergarten teacher, and she will tell you that boys and girls are pretty much very empathic with each other, almost in gender. You don't see a lot of difference in gender. You don't see a lot of difference in culture. But as they grow up, as they're in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, you start to see differences. The boys withhold their empathy, and girls still tend to be very interactive and empathic, but you start to see a difference in terms of bias and prejudice. Prejudice is a way of misperceiving, because people start to learn your last name, or you're from India, or I'm from China, or somebody else is from England. We live in an international world today, so kids don't screen out that. They just love the person for who they are and how you're interacting with them. But as we get older, we take on the values and the perceptions and probably biases and misperceptions of our families. And that tends to distort how we relate. But empathy basically is looking beyond the surface, looking beyond the surface into the heart and soul of another human being, so we can see who they are. It's sort of like when you buy a novel because you like the cover of the book and because it has a beautiful picture of the ocean, but then you get home and you read it and you find that the writing is not very good and it's not a very good story. So this is looking beyond the surface and training yourself to look beyond the surface.
Mhm. And this is a huge problem in dating, where people have these notions of, number one, what their type is, number two, who they should be with in terms of the attraction factors. So, that beautiful book cover is similar to that a woman who told me at age 70 or 75 that she only would date men with a full head of hair. These are things that actually prevent you from connecting to a person, because you're not really seeing a person. You're seeing a head of hair. And in the end, those things don't matter as much as the heart of a person, the character of a person.
Absolutely.
But we're not trained to do that, and we're trained to keep ourselves safe from letting everybody in. So I think that becomes a fear, and religion separates people. Color can separate people. So many things that we're fed. That's a big other discussion. But I think I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and it's we were told certain things that I don't agree with anymore, and and that can be threatening to people who still do. So
yes.
It's a difficult thing. I have it within my own family. I have 3 children, and they all worship differently and feel differently about God or lack thereof. And one of the biggest challenges for me was to listen to my son, who decided that he did not believe in God anymore, and to really be present with him and hear what was alive for him. That took a tremendous amount of empathy, and and we're so close because of it. Because I never pushed him away because of my fears, I let him in. And so that's hard for a lot of people. It took a lot of work on my part. But I think that.
I'm sorry, you go ahead. No, I'm just thinking, what a different world it would be if parents did that, wouldn't it be?
It would be amazing, and we're often I see so much of parenting is about trying to raise clones of yourself, really wanting to push somebody into a box that feels good to you as a parent.
Yes.
And I have a friend who is from India, and she was talking to me last night about how she met her boyfriend, who became her husband, and how in India you were raised pretty much to become an engineer or somebody in the medical profession. Everything else is a hobby, and your parents basically set you up to, you don't marry for love, you marry because your parents told you to marry this person. And she went out of both of those norms and found a guy who was totally out of her caste level, came from a different state in India, spoke a different language, and it took a while for the parents to really see eye to eye on this. It takes courage to do that, but they have a wonderful relationship. So, it's very interesting, this prejudice. So let's talk a little more about prejudice and how does prejudice contribute to stress, and what can we do about it?
Well, when we have prejudices, and oftentimes people don't realize what prejudices they have, but whenever we encounter someone who we have an inherent prejudice against, whether conscious or unconscious, we begin to experience a degree of stress. We're tense. We're not comfortable. And when we're stressed, we release the stress hormone cortisol, which, as I mentioned earlier, limits the capacity for empathy while also causing repetitive negative thinking. And if you have prejudice against several types of people, it's likely that your cortisol levels will be consistently high. And in addition to causing negative thinking, cortisol also causes weight gain, inflammation, hair loss, breaks down muscle tissue, causes flabbiness, depression, anxiety, and most importantly, memory loss. It actually kills neurons in the memory center of the brain. So it's a very dangerous neurochemical when it's secreted with consistency, and that's what happens when we have prejudices against other people.
That's pretty massive the results of releasing those cortisol, the high cortisol.
Well, if you're sitting on a bus or in a plane or next to someone that doesn't look like you, and you automatically start assuming things, you're tense, right? You just don't feel comfortable, and people don't realize that in that moment you're secreting cortisol, and you're really hurting yourself physiologically. And most importantly, cortisol limits empathy. Stress limits empathy. So our empathic range, like a wide lens camera, comes into a very narrow look at the other person. And then we start generalizing. Oh, she's from India, she's from China, she's Jewish, she's Christian. And as you were saying in terms of your example with your son, you rather than assuming, what I'm trying to teach in this book is listen. That's why I have a chapter on empathic listening. Actually listen to find out who this person is. Because in the end, I'm absolutely convinced that we all have much more in common than we have differences. But we have to see beyond the surface to find that common place.
I so agree. I mean, that was the basis of nonviolent communication when Marshall Rosenberg came into war zones and found commonalities. He found that people had the same needs. They had common needs and common feelings. And when we can connect in that way, then we know that we have much more in common than we have differences. And I think it's true of dating in general, that we tend to project and to assume way too much and not ask enough questions and not clarify. And so when somebody's got a knee-jerk reaction, how can they work on it? So you're talking about empathic listening. Is that the main key?
Well, empathic listening really, sort of teaches us to slow down. So, and when we slow down the influence of the primitive brain that you referred to earlier, and then we use the thinking brain to perceive, so that we can perceive more accurately and really dispel old biased thinking based on early conditioning, because that distorts reality and causes unnecessary tension. So when we use empathy, we try to slow down. We try to ask open-ended questions, not closed-ended questions. Ask questions where we're really trying to get to know, genuinely trying to get to know the other person, so that we're not assuming anything. We, don't go into a situation where you look at someone and, he's handsome or she's pretty or she's of my faith or she's from the same part of the country. You can assume a lot of things that are incorrect immediately, but you think based on the exterior or based on the resume that you're safe. Sometimes people, when I was at Harvard, people would come in and I'd say, well, how did you hear about me? And they'd say, oh, well, I heard you're at Harvard. And I'd say, is that why you decided to come and see me? Well, yeah. And I said, did you know Timothy Leary was at Harvard? And he was giving out acid in the 90s. Did you know 8 out of 10 psychiatrists at Harvard lost their license 4 years ago because of indiscriminate behavior with patients? And he goes, why are you telling me this? I said, I'm telling you this because you shouldn't be choosing me because of something on a resume. You have to make up your mind after we meet whether you want to continue. And I'll make up my mind too. But that's not going to help you looking at a resume. I'm trying to teach something about idealizing on the surface. It might mean something. It might mean nothing. Right?
Yeah, it's true. There's a big tendency to Google people like crazy before we meet, and especially in the dating world. And I have a problem with that. I think that if you have a really bad feeling about somebody and you want to check it out on Google, go right ahead. I have found out that somebody was an ex-convict and went to jail for embezzlement, and that's good information to know. But I don't want somebody coming in to a date with me and knowing that I'm a dating coach and I've written these articles and I've done this, and they're watching everything I've ever produced. And I've had people like that. I want them to see me, not my resume, not what I've created. But, when you're in a relationship also, you're not going to be exactly the same as you are in your work life. And so you want somebody to get to know who you are today, not 6 months ago, not when you first got married, not, and knowing that people have the capacity to change, I think is also really important. People tend to ask these questions in dating, like, who initiated the divorce? It's irrelevant to me. I don't think that's an important question.
Yeah. The only question I ask people when you're talking about, because I certainly have a lot of clients and I've been doing 3 group sessions for over 25 years, so, usually 60 to 70% of the group have been divorced, and we talk about meeting other people, and of course we talk about Match.com and JDates and all of the others. And when I hear people talk about divorce, I say, so he asked you about what caused your divorce, and you said, well, there's some things that I did, and there's some things that he did, and our personalities didn't match, and so forth and so on. I said, what was his answer? Oh, he told me all about what his wife did. And I said, well, that didn't raise a flag. Did he tell you anything about himself? No, it was all about her. I said, not good.
Yes,
not a good
not
time.
Good.
I mean,
Blame is bad.
No innocent party. So blaming is one of the worst characteristics in a relationship. And if you're encountering somebody who's telling you about their terrible husband or their terrible wife, and they were lily clean and didn't do anything, and you wouldn't believe my bad luck in ending up with this person, you better start running.
Yep. I so agree with you. And I've asked the question, what's the most important thing that you've learned since your divorce? What have you learned about relationship? Yeah. Right. And so some people are like, nothing. Okay, well, maybe we will never see each other again. That's the only thing that's important to me really is, have you learned? Have you learned about yourself? Yeah. Have you learned what to do better next time? There's so much that we can learn in life. Okay, so let's talk about empathy and sympathy. I know Brene Brown did a beautiful video. Have you seen that one on the difference between empathy and sympathy?
I have not seen it. I know people have mentioned it to me, but I have not got to see it, no.
Yeah, it's important because I think, having gone through some crisis in my life, when people give sympathy and not empathy, it feels awful. So if you can explain the difference between the two and why it matters.
Okay. Well, let me give you an example of a client last week where my client, dad, passed away about a year ago, and she was devastated. They were very, very close, and he had a fatal heart attack and died. She moved into a new neighborhood in our area here in Massachusetts, and she heard about a neighbor that she does not know very well, but she heard that her dad passed just a few days ago. So she put together a flower arrangement, and she put together a basket of food, and she walked over and rang the doorbell. And when the woman, her neighbor, answered the doorbell, she said, "Oh, my God, I'm so sorry to hear about your father. You must be devastated. I was so devastated when my dad passed a year ago." And she went on and on saying, I'm so sorry about how you must be feeling. And the woman looked at her and said, my dad left us when I was 2 years old. I never saw my father after that. I have no memory of him. I wouldn't recognize him if he was walking down the street. So I thank you for bringing this over, the food and the flowers, but I'm not devastated at all. So you see, sympathy rushes in. Sympathy rushes in to console based on identifying from our own experience. Empathy holds back and waits till you ascertain the facts. See, this woman, and she's a very good-hearted person, so she walked down there and she was doing something that she thought was very giving, but in fact, she didn't connect with that woman because they were in totally different places. Empathy takes its time to ascertain objective facts. It's fact-oriented. It's truth-oriented. So it doesn't assume anything. She was assuming, based on her experience, that your experience must be the same, but of course it wasn't.
Yeah, and I remember visiting someone who lost a child, and I had lost a child as well. And so somebody came up to me and said, "Wow, you know exactly what they're feeling." And I said, I actually don't know what they're feeling because I'm not them, and that's the truth. And we can't project onto others. We might be able to understand the feeling of losing a child, but it's not the same for me as it is for her. And I think that we have to remember that. And so curiosity, no assumptions, ask open-ended questions, learn to listen empathically. Those are some really important keys that we spoke about today. Any parting thoughts as we close?
Well, first of all, I'm very sorry that you lost a child. That was hard to hear. I'm sorry that you experienced that. And
thank you.
I think, the book is a workbook. There's exercises at the end of every chapter that really encourage you to expand your empathic range. And when you do, I'm absolutely a believer that empathy is the most important capacity to develop for a successful personal and professional life. So I'm hoping people will use that opportunity. And if you do get the book, don't read it quickly. Please read it slowly. Read a chapter every few days and do the exercises, do the journaling. And I think it will really potentially allow you to see yourself and others much more accurately.
I love it. And so how can people find the book?
Well, the book is on Amazon. You can go to the Amazon website, amazon.com, or barnesandnoble.com, or you can go to my publisher, newworldlibrary.com. It's actually on sale on Amazon this week right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
My website is balanceyoursuccess.com. You can read about it there, too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Arthur. This was a really valuable time, and I wish we had more time to go even deeper because this is such an important topic.
Well, I really enjoyed talking with you, Sandy. You ask great questions, and I can tell that you understand what we're talking about. So hopefully we'll talk again in the future.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for listening today, and I hope you all go on your last first date very soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.